Have the Baltimore Ravens been forgotten? We talk about it next here on Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And we've returned here with another episode of Locked On Ravens. I am your host, Kevin Ostreicher of Ravens Wire. Today's sponsor is Get Upside. Just download the free Get Upside app and use promo code TOUCHDOWN to get 25 cents per gallon or more cash back on your first tank. We return here. It is Thursday here on Locked On Ravens. We're just a couple days away from the Super Bowl. Now, unfortunately, the Ravens will not be playing in said Super Bowls. It will be a battle between the Cincinnati Bengals and the Los Angeles Rams, but the Ravens offseason in full swing. And today we're going to be talking about a plethora of different topics. In the first segment, Marlon Humphrey was on Radio Row in the area in Los Angeles. So we're going to be talking about what he had to say to some of the various media members, including Peter Bukowski of Locked On Today. So it's very cool that Peter was able to get to sit down with Marlon Humphrey for a few minutes and talk about a bunch of different topics with him, and we'll talk about some of the other stuff he said too, because kind of funny, kind of entertaining, and some kind of serious stuff as well. But the main part of the show in the second and third segments are going to be about just like the whole forgotten thing for this Ravens team. Have the Ravens been forgotten? We'll kind of dive into the answer to that question and why and how they can maybe come back if they have been, and this, that, and the other. In the third segment, we'll take a different approach on it and kind of talk about like forgotten aspects of this team, whether they were from 2020 or way back in the day, if you want to call it that. Just things that have been forgotten about this team by, I think, a lot of different people. So a kind of fun twist on some things today. I'm excited to dive into it. So let's dive into it. But before we do that, if you're here with us on YouTube, so you can see my face, you can see my background and everything, be sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel. It does help out a lot. Our first goal, 1,000 subscribers. We're getting there. We're growing. The Locked On Ravens family is growing. I love it. And I thank everybody who has already subscribed. And if you're considering it, please be sure to do so. I at least highly recommend it. And I think it will be well worth it. We put out content Monday through Friday at 6 a.m. Eastern time, but we do it in audio form as well. That's where we started. And I want to thank everybody who is listening here in audio form today, whether that's on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, anywhere you get your favorite podcasts on your favorite podcast providers. And thank you for making Locked On Ravens your first listen of the day. Also, be sure to follow me on Twitter at KOstriker34 and the Locked On Ravens account at Locked On Ravens for show updates. So let's dive into some of the things that Marlon Humphrey had to say on Radio Row yesterday. And it's kind of funny because he put out a video on his Instagram story. He's like, hey, this is Radio Row. And then he talked about how much he was asked about Ja'Marr Chase. He's like, I've been asked about Ja'Marr Chase, X amount of times. I'm about to be asked about him probably 5 more times. And a lot of people asked him about him. And mainly because, one, the Ravens and the Bengals play in the same division. The Bengals are representing the North in the Super Bowl this year. And Humphrey did say in a different interview, we'll talk about this in a few minutes, but he said, hey, look, I might not be rooting for the Bengals, but you can't help but appreciate what they've been doing and being impressed with it. Not quote for quote there from Marlon Humphrey, but kind of along the same lines. And so Peter Bukowski of Locked On Today asked Marlon Humphrey about some of his top receivers in the NFL, kind of guys you look at the film and you go like, wow, like, oh man. And he talked about different types of guys like Justin Jefferson. Justin Jefferson was the first name to come out of his mouth, which I think is kind of telling. He talked about Devontae Adams. He talked about a couple other guys as well, and also talked about Ja'Marr Chase, where, there's just not a lot of film on him yet. Like he is a rookie. This is his rookie season. So Humphrey talked about how Ja'Marr Chase, he's like, you don't know what he's doing, but he's doing it out there. He's going out there and he's doing it. So that was kind of interesting to hear. And he was also asked about why he wears number 44. And a lot of people have heard this story before about how he wears it for his dad, who did wear it at the NFL level. And it's interesting. Another tidbit of that story, which actually I didn't know or maybe wasn't made available until Humphrey said it, was, he was planning on it whether he signed an extension with the Ravens or whether he left the Ravens. That was a goal of his to move to 44. And he's talked about the importance of the number, how he's wanted to do it. But then he saw the opportunity with Earl Thomas coming to the team. Earl Thomas obviously wore number 29 for the Seahawks before coming over to Baltimore. And Thomas obviously wanted that number from Humphrey, who was, not as veteran as he is now in the league. So Humphrey saw that opportunity. He gave 29 to Earl Thomas, and the rest is history. Humphrey's in number 44, and he was asked a little bit about some superstitions, which was kind of funny because with the single digit numbers, maybe players going back to their college numbers or things like that. And Humphrey said he didn't really have a ton, but funny enough, he said he wore a pair of underwear that kind of gave him that superstitious look. He said he kind of moved away from it, but still wears it sometimes. So that's kind of a funny tidbit there from Peter's interview. But the whole thing, it's a great about 10-minute interview if you want to check it out on the Locked On Today podcast. It's on a bunch of different Locked On channels if you want to look at it, but just some interesting tidbits there from Humphrey. And Humphrey also talked a little bit about the AFC North and kind of what I talked about a few minutes ago there earlier about when he got into the league, he understood winning the North was beating the Steelers twice. Like that is how you won the North when Humphrey got into the league. Humphrey was a first round pick in 2017. So coming into the league, yeah, it was really a Steelers and Ravens ran division, but the Bengals were still kind of there, right? The Bengals had their years of success back when, Andy Dalton was there, AJ Green, Montez Burfict, regardless of the person he is, he was a good player. And so they had their years, but Humphrey realized that, hey, if we want to win the North here, we got to beat the Steelers twice. And that was his welcome to the Ravens, welcome to the AFC North type deal. But then it's kind of become this narrative where, look, all four teams are really good now. And it was kind of like, oh, hey, the Steelers are still great. The Ravens are still great. The Browns built their roster, but then it's the Bengals who go through their kind of purgatory with, they get the number 1 overall pick, then they get the number 5 overall pick. And now Humphrey's excited about it. He's really excited about the fact that, hey, instead of having 2 good games against the Steelers and 1 against the Browns and 1 against the Bengals, he said it's going to be 6 really hard-fought games, and the players get up for those games. They get up to play in those big games. And now with the Bengals being the Bengals in terms of, hey, they're the AFC North champions, they're the AFC champions, Marlon Humphrey understands, and the whole league understands that this Bengals team is for real. They have cap space to spend this offseason. They're going to be good for a very long time, much like I think a lot of these teams in the North will be. I think the Ravens, we'll talk about them a lot more, obviously, throughout this show in the second and third segments and just their forgottenness or non-forgottenness, but they're going to be good for a while. You have Cleveland, who, if Baker Mayfield can figure it out, if he's the guy for them, they have a very talented roster. Pittsburgh has a very talented roster as well. We'll see what they do at quarterback, but it is an exciting time right now in the AFC North. Obviously, people are like, oh, well, we want the worst division possible so the Ravens can win all 6 of those games and get an easy path to the playoffs. But, these players like to play the best. They want to go up against the best. And, they understand that in order to become the best, they have to play against the best, which is absolutely 100% true. And the Ravens, they went 1-5 in the division in the AFC North in 2021. And as we've talked about here before, it's pretty unheard of in the John Harbaugh era and just the Ravens era in general. John Harbaugh's only had 2 losing seasons as a head coach of the Baltimore Ravens. That was in 2015 and then here in 2021. Both years, injuries had a ton to do with it. And this is a conversation for the second segment, but it just goes to show that with the Ravens in this AFC North, it is not just a Ravens and Steelers-led division anymore. It is the Bengals. It is the Browns. As much as Baker Mayfield struggled in 2021, as much as that team struggled, they are still very talented and have a bunch of talent on that roster. Pittsburgh, with Ben Roethlisberger out, who's in? But that defense is still great. This whole AFC North is amazing. Marlon Humphrey said, kind of the same stuff along those lines, where it's, what? The Bengals, they have a lot of talent, and you have to respect what they're doing. But again, he's not necessarily rooting for him on Sunday. That's what he said. So it's kind of interesting. And the whole Radio Row experience, it seems great. And Humphrey said that he was having a great time there. Obviously, he did say he would rather be playing in the big game, which I know a lot of people who are tuning in here today want the Ravens to be playing in that game. But we'll talk throughout this offseason about how they can get back to the Super Bowl that they have not been to since the 2012-2013 season. In fact, they have not been to the AFC Championship game since the 2012-2013 season. So some good tidbits there from Marlon Humphrey on Radio Row. He also went on a bunch of other shows. He looked at some kind of like that mean tweet segment they do on Jimmy Kimmel, where Humphrey looked at some of those tweets with some of the Barstool guys, and that was a funny little segment that they did. And so, yeah, a lot of great Radio Row coverage there of Marlon Humphrey from a lot of really great shows, including the Locked On Today crew. But we'll head into our first break now. And when we get back, we'll be diving in to some of just if the Ravens have been forgotten or if they have not been forgotten. So stay tuned for that, and we will be right back. Hey, Ravens fans, this is Kevin Oestreicher with the Cowboy app. Everyone who buys gas needs to know about and get upside. Just download the app for free in the App Store or Google Play right now and use promo code touchdown for 25 cents per gallon or more on your first fill-up cash back. Don't pay full price of the pump anymore. Get cash back using Get Upside. Just download the app for free and use promo code touchdown for 25 cents per gallon or more on your first tank. Some people who drive a lot are making as much as $200 to $300 a year in cash back, and there's no catch. Cashback is added right to your account. You can cash out anytime to your bank account, PayPal, or any gift card for Amazon and other brands. Just download the free Get Upside app and use promo code touchdown to get 25 cents per gallon or more cash back on your first tank. That's code touchdown. We're back here. It's our second segment of Locked On Ravens here on Thursday. Kevin Oestreicher, your host, still here with you. We talked a bit about Marlon Humphrey on Radio Row in the Super Bowl down there in Los Angeles, but now we're going to talk about the Ravens team as a whole. Talk about if they've been forgotten or not, because obviously the 2021 season was not amazing. It was a very trying, very hard year. The Ravens did everything they could, but in the end, it just wasn't enough. The injuries were too much. And I had said before the season when J.K. Dobbins and Marcus Peters and Gus Edwards went down, it was, hey, this is going to be a story of injuries for the entire year. It's either going to be the Ravens were able to overcome the injuries or they were not. At the end of the day, they started strong, but they really weren't able to overcome them. So with the 8-9 finish, with the 6-game losing streak, with all the guys being out, the short answer to have the Ravens been forgotten is yes. And I think that gives them a chip on their shoulder. Now, it hasn't been like they've been just wiped from the face of the earth. There are, whether you want to talk about publications, media members, whatnot, there have been multiple articles out there about, hey, look, the Ravens have probably the best chance to bounce back out of the non-playoff teams in 2022 because they just lost so many guys. They didn't have their guys. And when you look at the NFL, and we've talked about this, when you look at just who, we can even go to conference championship games. Who in the conference championship, what teams get there? Usually, not all the time, but usually it's teams that are healthy. And you look at this year, Cincinnati, pretty healthy the whole year. The Rams, pretty healthy the whole year. The 49ers were a bit of an outlier. They were kind of like in the middle of injuries. They did suffer some key ones, but they didn't suffer a major, not Ravens level, I'll say. And then the last team, which is the Chiefs, again, relatively healthy. So it's tough when you have such a talented team like the Ravens who enter the 2021 year with such high expectations. This was a year where I thought the Ravens would have made the AFC Championship at a minimum if they had their guys. But, we can face it. Football is a game of injuries. Football is a game where no team escapes fully healthy. And even during some of the healthiest years like 2019 for this team, they suffered big injuries, untimely injuries. It happens. And I'm not saying like, hey, this is an excuse that only the Ravens have, right? Every team goes through it. But to have more than 20 guys on injured reserve, to lose your entire running back room before the season starts and you have to kind of pivot, to lose an all-pro corner as well, to go through training camp injuries, to have that continue throughout the entire season, now we're at a point where a decent amount of people, I'm not going to say everybody, but a decent amount of people look at this Ravens team. They see Lamar Jackson, who struggled towards the back half of his season, which was cut short due to an injury of his own, and they say, they're okay, but they don't have what it takes. Lamar Jackson doesn't have what it takes. John Harbaugh's not the coach. You can go off of, you can look at Twitter and you can see all this stuff. You can look on publications. You can see all this stuff where it is a forgotten team, where in 2020, this team finished super strong, right? Ran for over 200 yards a game, won their final 5, made the playoffs, won a playoff game. In 2019, they go 14-2. And obviously you can't dwell too much on the past. You have to move forward. And I understand that. The Ravens of 2019 are no more. They have been no more since the 2020 season started, by the way, which is kind of a funny concept, but it is true, where, not every team is the same. The 2021 Ravens now are a thing of the past, and they'll officially be a thing of the past once the Super Bowl concludes and the whole story of the 2021 season is written in the books and finalized. So now you have to look forward to 2022. And I think a lot of people are in for an awakening when this team is able to come back fully healthy. Now, it's going to depend on what they do in the offseason, right? This is not just hey, the Ravens get their guys back and they're winning the Super Bowl. There's a lot that has to happen. And I think Eric DeCosta understands that. I think John Harbaugh understands that. The players understand that. But they're hungry. They have a chip on their shoulder. Look no further to what Chuck Clark said after week 17. He says, yeah, we'll be back. That he had one simple thing to say, walked off the podium, and that was it. These guys are upset. They're angry at how their season went. And it can be frustrating for sure. I mean, for a team that has such high expectations, to have these injuries that are really, for the most part, out of your control. You can talk about the training regimens, and that's something, again, the Ravens do have to look at. It seems like they are looking at it. But for a team that has had so much consistent success, that has such a young offense, that is probably going to be retooling on defense with 10 picks in the 2022 draft, at least they're slated to have that right now. It is kind of interesting how forgotten this team has become. And I'm not saying that people are saying, oh, this team is an 0-17 team and they're never going to win again and everything like that. But this is what have you done for me now lately league. And what the Ravens have done for people lately is lose 6 games in a row and miss the playoffs. That's what it is. People, let's look at Cincinnati. People right now, who is the talk of town? Who is the talk of the AFC right now? The talk of the NFL, the talk of America is Joe Burrow. It is Joe Burrow himself, because what he was able to do in his first full season as a starter, because he had the whole knee injury thing in 2020, his rookie season. But what he's been able to do in his first year as a starter, first full year as a starter, is incredible. It is. I'm not going to sit here and say it's not, because it is incredible what he's doing. But people are saying, is this the best first year that any quarterback has ever had, a first year starting that any quarterback has ever had? It's great, but do we not remember Lamar Jackson won a unanimous MVP in his first full season of starting? I mean, it's just things like that where you compare and contrast, you figure out, all right, who has the better season, who's this, who's that, and everybody's entitled to their opinions for sure. I'm not saying they're not, but it just becomes a conversation of a team that has been so, I'll go back to consistent. You have a whole litany of people who are saying, well, this is the Bengals division now, and the Browns are better, and the Steelers are better. As we talked about in the first segment, the AFC North has 4 talented teams. And as Spencer Schultz has talked before on the show, if you take the Ravens roster at the end of week 18 and you say, all right, you're going out there, you're playing a full 17-game season, what's the record of that team? What's the record of that team? Probably like 3-14, 4-13, top 5 pick, top 10 pick. That's where you're looking. You're not looking at 8-9 and just barely missing the playoffs. When the Ravens are trotting out Robert Jackson instead of Marcus Peters, or Daryl Worley instead of Marlon Humphrey, it makes a little difference, right? Even the Tyler Huntley to Lamar Jackson thing, talk about what have you done for me now lately. Tyler Huntley had some great starts, and people were saying, hey, trade Lamar Jackson. Lamar Jackson is a starter in this league for a reason. He's a very good starter in this league for a reason. He's a starter of the Ravens for a reason. And there's a reason Huntley's a backup. Not trying to rag on Huntley or anything, but there are things he needs to work on, just like there are things with Jackson that he needs to work on. But now heading into this offseason, it's almost better this way, I feel like, because if you go back, and we'll talk about this in the third segment, if you go back and look at the Ravens teams of the past, they never really had that target on their back where, after 2019, they had a target. They had a huge, even though they lost in the divisional round, they had a huge target on their back. But, I remember the Ravens teams that would just sneak into the playoffs, like 2012 to 2013, right? That 2012-2013 team had a terrible end to their year. They fired Cam in the middle of the season. They hired Jim Caldwell to be his replacement. What happens? They sneak into the playoffs, and they go on a magical and amazing run. And sometimes those things happen, like we saw with the Cincinnati Bengals in their amazing magical run that no one really anticipated. So, in terms of the Ravens being forgotten, I think they are being forgotten. And the, pure excellence this franchise has shown, they are not a perfect franchise. Nobody is a perfect franchise in all of sports. Nobody is perfect in all of the world. But, to say that the Ravens are done, find a new quarterback, blow it up, do this, do that. The Ravens, they had their roster blown up by injuries in 2021. That was the whole, hey, this is what it's going to look like if you blow it up and you kind of start from scratch. That's the bare bones roster pretty much, where you have 1 or 2 stars, but everybody else is out. That's what it was. The Ravens have enough this offseason to make it work, to improve their roster. They'll lose some guys, that'll be some of the conversation points as well. There will be holes on this roster, it feels like. The Ravens do a generally good job of picking up the depth and making sure they have enough at many positions. But at the same time, there are some breaks that happen in terms of injuries, both good and bad, depending on who you are. So the Ravens are a forgotten team, it feels like, at the end of the day. But, we'll see how they respond to that and how they perform during the 2022 season. But we'll head into our final break now. And when we get back, we'll be diving into more forgotten talk, but talking about some forgotten aspects of the Ravens from years past. So stay tuned for that, and we'll be right back. BetOnline is you covered this season with more props, odds, and lies than ever before. As football continues to march through the playoffs right to the big game in a couple weeks, BetOnline.net remains the best spot for all your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. And it's not just football. BetOnline has up-to-the-minute info on pro and college hoops, NHL, boxing, UFC, along with live real-time updates of current games. Don't wait to take advantage of all the amazing offers available for the 2022 season. BetOnline, where the game starts. We're back here. It's our final segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Ostreicher, your host, still here with you. And we're going to take a trip down memory lane a bit, but still sticking with the whole forgotten theme. And just talking about forgotten aspects of the Ravens, both good and bad. It's fun to look at the good things. Kind of funny to laugh at the bad ones a little bit too and just be like, why was this team like this? So let's start off with a couple of things. Obviously, I think one of the first forgotten aspects of this team is just how dominant they are in the run game. Seriously. I mean, you lose J.K. Dobbins, you lose Gus Edwards, throw Justice Hill in there if you want to. They have to sign guys like Latavius Murray, Devonta Freeman, who is my guy. I am on team re-sign Devonta Freeman. If not re-sign Devonta Freeman, draft a guy like Hassan Haskins. But I think Devonta Freeman has value. But is he more valuable than J.K. Dobbins? Absolutely not. Gus Edwards? Absolutely not. What the Ravens proved to the league is that while they're zagging and they're doing their thing, they can be successful. The whole league is zigging with the whole, we're air raid offense. We're throwing the ball 50 times a game. We're drafting all these receiver weapons. Well, the Ravens, they ran the ball down teams' throats. They were running over teams, and it worked. It worked. I mean, having the ball control offense, it worked. And I'm not saying that they're going to do that for 17 games a year now, because they have the receiving weapons in Marquise Brown and Rashad Bateman and Devin Duvernay and James Prochet and Tylan Wallace. They have the guys now who can go out there, and you can put three receivers on the field with Mark Andrews, and you can have a very competent, very good passing offense, as we saw a little bit at the beginning stages of 2021. But I think people forget just almost what it's like to have a dominant run offense, because, it was such a non-factor in 2021. And again, I know some people look at the stats and they'll say, Kevin, what are you talking about, man? They were top 5 in every rushing category, top 10. And I'm like, all right, you're looking at the box score stats. That is accurate. If you look at the team on the field and what they did, couldn't be further from the truth. I mean, it was really hard to watch the Ravens run the football this year. And they had good spurts, don't get me wrong. It wasn't like they averaged 1 yard a carry, but it was not what people were used to. It was not what the Ravens were used to. They had to adjust their offense to an offense that I think they wanted to ease their way into instead of just full-blown dive into it. So I think that's an aspect that people have forgotten, of just hey, when the Ravens run the football effectively, they're really, really hard to stop on offense, and they have that unpredictability to them. Whereas defenses in 2021 were yeah, we're not scared of this Ravens rushing attack. The offensive line isn't great. They haven't performed amazingly all season. The running backs aren't J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards. So, it's whatever. Well, so that's kind of a little bit of forgotten aspects from this team. Another forgotten aspect is consistent sacks. Yeah, consistent sacks are kind of an issue, at least individual player-wise. The Ravens have not had a double-digit sack guy since 2017 when Terrell Suggs had 11. Funny enough, Don Martindale started to take over when the Ravens started to have their non-double-digit sack guys. And I'm saying consistent sacks because Don Martindale was great at scheming up pressures and great at kind of doing a lot of different things with getting guys free, being able to blitz. And I'm not saying it's all on Don Martindale, right? There were guys at the quarterback multiple times for the Ravens, many, too many times to count, and they just couldn't finish. So I think it's a scheme and a player thing, but it's forgotten. Terrell Suggs back in the day there, Elvis Dumervil. You can go further back if you want to as well, but the Ravens had consistent oh yeah, you have to double team this guy, you have to, and maybe they have that in Odafe Owe. I think that they kind of do, but the growth has to be there. The scheme has to be there. So that's another thing for me. But sticking with defense, I mean, people forget that this team, defense is their calling card. Back before the Lamar Jackson era, the Ravens were known for what? Their defense. Ray Lewis, Ed Reed, Olodinyata, Terrell Suggs, all these different really good players. Chris McAllister, right? I could go on and on Jared Johnson. There could be we could do a whole week of shows about the Ravens and their defense. It's just how dominant they were, the hard-hitting nature, barely allowed any points. I mean, that 2000 defense, one of the greatest of all time, if not the greatest of all time. I mean, just unbelievable. And then even past that, when the Lamar Jackson era started, it started to become, this is an offensive football team. And that's completely fine. I'm not saying the Ravens have to be defensive for their entire franchise history, but then we start to see the pass defense struggling a little bit. The run defense, to the Ravens' credit, over the past couple of years has been very good. But the pass defense, with injuries, it's been a little shaky, and people they've maybe had it a bit easier throwing on the Ravens than they have back in recent years. So this isn't like the dominant defense the Ravens were back in the day, if you want to call it back in the day. But people kind of forget how dominant the Ravens defense was, how much the Ravens value their defense. I mean, they still value it a ton in the building. It's one of their calling cards. It has been. I think it will continue to be. So kind of interesting there that the Lamar Jackson era has shaded over that a little bit. And with the Ravens, even in 2019, right, putting up 40 points a game, 50, 30, all these different things. Lamar Jackson's made this team exciting on offense. And you go back to Joe Flacco, and we can talk about this. People forget the Ravens had a very boring offense for a lot of years. And the Ravens were in kind of the who's the franchise quarterback territory. Do we have an elite quarterback? Now, Joe Flacco is an elite quarterback, all right? Joe Flacco, Mr. Elite himself, by the way. But was he a star quarterback? He was no Tom Brady. He was no Peyton Manning. He was no Aaron Rodgers, none of those guys. So, the Ravens offenses consisted of drawing pass interference penalties. Torrey Smith, a master at that. You had dink and dunk plays on a screen pass to Buck Allen on a 3rd and 11 that goes for 3 yards. I mean, it was infuriating at times and just plain boring to watch at times because you knew the offense was capable of more, especially back when, we can stick with Joe Flacco, the arm that he had, the arm that Joe Flacco had, some of the receivers that Joe Flacco had. Now, Joe Flacco did not have the best crew receivers throughout his time with Baltimore. The Ravens tried, but they really couldn't find a ton. I mean, Anquan Bolden was amazing. Torrey Smith, amazing. They had a couple other key guys as well. Marlon Brown, Kamar Aiken, some guys in the rough. But the Ravens offense was not an exciting product to watch. And I kind of talked about this a bit. I think it was before the year started, where if you're talking about fantasy football, there was nobody who wanted anything to do with the Ravens offense outside of maybe 1 or 2 players in the later rounds. You had back when Ray Rice on the field was at his best. He was a high draft pick. Bolden, Smith, some of those guys were draft picks as well. But during that, 2013 to 2017 stretch, who were you drafting in fantasy on the Ravens? I mean, Justin Forsett had a really good year in 2014. Torrey Smith had another couple solid years. Joe Flacco was a borderline QB2, but that offense was can we not throw a screen here on 3rd and 11? Can this not happen? Can that not happen? So it was a little bit just boring, but what can you do? Now we don't have to deal with that because the Ravens have Lamar Jackson. That offense is exciting now, and hopefully they'll continue to build and continue to grow on what they have been able to do and kind of build themselves over these past couple of seasons, which has been pretty exciting. And the final thing I will talk about, and this is a little controversial, and I want to pull up the stats here because this one might give me a little bit of the flashbacks. But Billy Cundiff, let's talk about Billy Cundiff for a second. I know that might have been a shock to some people. I apologize. I'll duck a little bit on the Billy Cundiff thing here. But a lot of people forget that before Billy Cundiff missed that kick against the Patriots, Billy Cundiff was actually a very good kicker for the Ravens. And that kick ruined his career. No excuse. One of the most frustrating times in Ravens history, that sequence of Lee Evans and Billy Cundiff. I know it's annoying. I understand. So I'll stop talking about that. But before that kick, Billy Cundiff was an all-pro kicker in 2010. He was really good for them in 2010. He ended up making 26 of 29 attempts for, that's an 89.7% field goal percentage. He made all of his extra points. He was really good, but then the drop-off started to happen in 2011. I mean, look, he only kicked for 3 years in Baltimore. He was like okay in 2009 for the Ravens, but Billy Cundiff, that 2010 season, people forget about that 2010 season. I'm not saying Billy Cundiff was like the best kicker ever, but he had a really good 2010 season, a decent 2011 season. 75% of his kicks were made. So, that's not like great at all, but it's not like he was making 60% of his kicks. Like in Dallas, there were 2 years where he made under 65% of his kicks, but Cundiff's 2010 season was great, and people forget about that. But, he missed a huge kick in a pivotal moment. There's no excuse for it. He lost out to Justin Tucker, and now we don't have to think about Billy Cundiff anymore. We can think about the great times we've had with Justin Tucker and the times that I've had writing about Justin Tucker, covering Justin Tucker, just watching Justin Tucker play has kind of been like, all right, the Billy Cundiff kick was horrible and terrible, but, for all the years that the Ravens have gotten out of Justin Tucker, I think that it would have been, amazing if Cundiff had made that kick. I think the Ravens win back-to-back Super Bowls if he makes that kick. I really do. And it's frustrating to look back on because I think that's what ends up happening. But at the end of the day, the Ravens have found the best kicker of all time in Justin Tucker. And I'm glad it turned out that way in terms of the Ravens getting a player like Tucker. Not the Cundiff kick, but people do forget that Cundiff's 2010 season was just miraculous. I don't know what had that pop into my mind right there, but when talking about forgotten stuff, there's a ton more that we could talk about. But I don't know, that Cundiff season was one that was great, but then the kick and then the emergence of Tucker kind of sealed his career to a kind of uneventful and kind of bad close. But that's all I have for you here today here on Locked On Ravens. When we get back here tomorrow, we'll dive into more Ravens talk to round out the week, so stay tuned for that, and I will see you tomorrow.